3 o'clock, West Philadelphia. Outside Studio B, autumn light floats like dust on a record sleeve. Inside, the floor gleams as if waxed by yesterday's songs. Girls tug the hems of circle skirts, boys pinch their ties into place, and the air hums with the shy electricity of first crushes. No one is handed any rules, yet every kid feels them. Good collars, good posture, good taste. As if the show itself whispers how to belong. A cameraman chalks an easy circle on the maple boards. It isn't a boundary, it's a tide. Step into that ring at the break, smile on the beat, and 100 letters will find your name by Friday. Miss the moment, and you're just another face drifting past the lens. From the booth, the red light blooms, warm, forgiving, merciless, and a needle drops somewhere in America. The program will look effortless, but that's the trick. Effort disguised as lightness. This is where rivalries sharpen and where the slow, secret romances begin. They called them the regulars. But regular was the last thing about that little constellation of faces who seemed to glide past the lens every afternoon. They had cards that opened the door without fuss, a practiced route to the best tiles on the maple floor, and an instinctive reading of camera sightlines the way surfers read water. In the room at 4548 Market Street, fame wasn't a billboard. It was a habit. Show up, look clean, hit the beat, smile like you meant it. Do that often enough, and a cameraman would begin to recognize the way you caught light, and a director would start trusting you to hold a frame when the music broke. The committee wasn't a contract. It was a circle of quiet privileges. Someone would tip a chin toward the dance ring when the chorus was near. Someone else would drift half a step to open a window in the picture for you. A nod here, a shuffle there, and suddenly you were centered at the exact second the singer lifted into the hook. The audience at home only saw effortlessness. Inside, there was choreography within the choreography, camera blocking carried out in glances and breath. Fan mail kept score. Envelopes with slanted handwriting and perfumed paper stacked into soft monuments in the mailroom, and the math of attention clicked forward another inch. A week where your name filled a dozen letters meant a week where the red light would find you again. 100 letters meant a producer's memory that lasted months. Girls in West Catholic uniforms wrote about your shoes and your turn. Boys asked what record player you owned and whether those were saddle shoes or just clever light. Each letter made you feel less like a kid and more like a promise. Of course, that promise sharpened into rivalries, the kind no one would admit. A favorite corner of the dance circle suddenly felt crowded. A late bus could cost you a camera break and hand it to someone who had been hovering at the edge of your light for weeks. After a while, you learned a second skill set the audience never clapped for. Timing your approach, making space without yielding the frame, moving as if you were generous while protecting the tiny territory a lens had taught you to claim. Yet the warmth of it was real too. Between songs, someone would fix your collar, share a peppermint, whisper which side the dolly would roll from next. You belonged to a living machine that turned shyness into poise and jittery hearts into clean lines on screen. And if you were lucky, the machine learned your name and spoke it back in letters. The bandstand look wasn't fashion so much as an oath. You could feel it in the fabric before the music even started. Wool that held a press through 2 bus rides, cotton that breathed under the lamps, seams that drew tidy lines down jittery legs. Boys learned to polish shoes until the leather held the room like a small moon. Girls learned the lift and settle of a circle skirt so the camera saw motion, not mischief. Good taste wasn't printed anywhere, but it hovered in the air like the scent of hairspray. Understood, obeyed, defended. Wardrobe was the first choreography. A floor manager's palm up meant smooth it down, tie, hem, ambition. Palm across the throat meant tame the step, keep hands above the waist, remember that the living room is watching. You could be wild inside the beat, but the edges had to be round. Lifts were discouraged and less rehearsed. Dips needed daylight between bodies. And if a hand held too long, someone would greet you at the commercial with a smile that said everything without saying a word. The uniforms of West Catholic girls slipped under cardigans. The boys' collars stood like little promises, even color lived by rules. White popped too fiercely under the lamps, black swallowed faces whole. Pastels carried best, especially on Saturdays when the national broadcast wanted daylight in a bottle. Stockings were mended invisibly. Sweater pulls were smoothed by friends who understood that a loose thread was less about fabric than about belonging. If your look read as careful, the camera trusted you. If it read as careless, the lens became a mirror you didn't want. There were other small vows the audience never heard. No gum, unless a sponsor's show on Saturday made chewing a kind of smile. No pockets hands, it slumped the line. No jackets off, effort reads as effort, but neatness reads as ease. And when the record cut hot and the whole room leaned forward on instinct, you learned the peculiar discipline of smiling without daring the world to misunderstand you. The show was built on the thrill of youth, but televised for the comfort of parents. What you wore was how you translated between the two. The best regulars learned to make the rules look like choices. They found grace in the hemline and freedom inside the frame. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being generous with the camera, giving it clean angles, clear stories, something America could invite to dinner. And yet, beneath the starch and shine, a different tension gathered. If image was currency, what happened when a teenager tried to spend it? Fame came to Pat the way a song comes to a jukebox, a coin of attention, a click, and suddenly the whole room was turning toward her. She had that bright, uncomplicated glow the cameras adored. Quick feet, a smile that traveled, a way of making a partner look better than he knew he could be. Letters piled up with her name underlined twice. Mothers liked her. Teenagers loved her. The lens, which can be so stingy, was generous with Pat. But attention is a kind of currency, and Bandstand kept a strict bank. Everyone understood, even if no one said it out loud, the show could make you known, but you could not spend that knowledge anywhere else. Not in ads, not in paid appearances, not even, in the most delicate part of the rulebook, in print with your own byline. The logic was tidy and old-fashioned. Protect the image, protect the show, protect the dream that what happened in Studio B belonged to the hour and the audience, not to any one star. Pat was a writer as well as a dancer, and writing wants daylight. Columns with her voice began to appear, teen world dispatches from the edge of the dance floor, cheerful, curious, exactly the kind of thing a country of kids would clip and keep. On paper, it seemed harmless. Who better to explain the music than a girl who knew how it felt to turn inside it? But the season outside was changing. Television had been bruised by headlines about influence and money, and anything that looked like converting screen time into personal commerce carried a new static charge. So the conversation happened, quietly, firmly, with all the courtesy that defined the show. The rules had not moved, they were simply being read more closely. Pat, who had given the program so much poise and light, was asked to step away. The audience learned in fragments, an absence, a rumor, a magazine cover that felt like a door closing. In living rooms from Jersey to Iowa, girls who had learned the lift and settle of their skirts from watching her felt the floor tilt just a little. What remains all these years later is not scandal, but weather. The way air feels different after a front has passed. You can admire the caution and still mourn the cost. Pat's gift was to make joy look natural. The lesson of her departure was that joy on television was managed. The program kept its shine. The kids kept dancing. But among the regulars, another rule etched itself a little deeper. Be luminous, not entrepreneurial. Give everything to the frame and keep nothing with your name on it. And yet, if the rules guarded the dream, the camera still craved a story. The next record would drop, the circle would open, and a different competition began, not for publication, but for the red light's exact breath-length mercy. The red light is a teacher. It trains you to hear the chorus 2 bars before it arrives, to feel where the lens will breathe, to know which way the dolly will drift even before the operator leans his shoulder into the rail. You start to map the room like a tide chart. There's the dance ring where attention pools. There's the soft corner where couples vanish. There's the axis line where a single step forward becomes a confession to the whole country. The trick isn't dancing harder, it's dancing clearer. Lift the chin at the cymbal tick. Let your smile bloom on the second beat of the hook. Give the camera a clean line of arms. No clutter, no doubt, and the living rooms will write back to you. Fan mail is how you learn the arithmetic. Monday's envelopes remember Friday's chorus. A neat hand from Toledo says the blue tie was better than the striped one. Someone from Camden has sketched your step in the margin like a blueprint. A dozen letters means you were seen. A stack means you were wanted. A shoebox means you've become a habit. The letters do not shout, but they add up, and in the control room, numbers always find the light. So the game inside the song begins. No one calls it competition. It's a hand that retreats half an inch so your partner's profile can breathe. It's the way you ease a half step to the left when you feel the camera tighten, as if you'd practiced courtesy your whole life. It's claiming the center by pretending not to claim it at all. And when a friend arrives late and slips into the ring just as the chorus breaks, you feel the sting and smile anyway. Rivalry on Bandstand is polite, but it is not imaginary. You learn odd courtesies, how to enter a frame as if invited, how to exit without taking heat with you, how to look thrilled for someone else's close-up and still keep your own promise to be ready when it's your turn. The lens rewards patience, but it also punishes hesitation. A beat lost is a week lost. Someone will hold the frame today who didn't yesterday, and the mail will tilt, and the floor will rearrange itself around the tilt as quietly as furniture moved after lights out. None of this would matter if the music weren't real. That's the saving grace. Beneath the geometry, you still feel the bass catch your ribs. You still catch your partner's breath and think, me too. And sometimes, when the room lifts as one and the cut lands just right, the camera stops being a judge and becomes a witness. That's when the stories take root, not just the names, which is why, when the needle drops on an old jitterbug, two faces keep returning to memory like a chorus you can't shake. They didn't announce themselves so much as arrive in the picture the way a melody arrives, familiar the second it starts. Justine had the kind of poise that made the camera relax. Bob had timing like a pocket watch you could dance to. Together, they looked like the answer to a question the show kept asking. What does young Joy look like when it learns rhythm? The floor brightened when they stepped into the ring, not because they begged it to, but because they understood the room, how to meet the lens, how to keep their own weather, even when the chorus kicked up a wind. On jitterbug days, the studio changed color. The tempo lifted, the floorboards chattered, and the air around the circle felt charged, like coins stacked on a windowsill trembling at the approach of a train. They didn't do the biggest tricks. They did the clean ones, breaks that landed on a dime, turns that opened like a door and closed like a promise, footwork neat enough to write home about. When the drop came, there's always a drop, they didn't show off, they listened, and then they flew just far enough to make the country lean toward its television sets. The afternoon they won, the applause felt older than they were, as if adults in other rooms had remembered being light on their feet for a minute. The prize mattered less than the permission it seemed to grant, that two teenagers from a studio in West Philadelphia could stand in the center of a national hour and hold it without blinking. Mailrooms noticed. So did the quiet politics of the floor. You could feel the attention redistribute itself by Monday, space opening the way an aisle opens for a bride, not because she asks, but because everyone else understands the moment. Off camera, the story grew softer. There were bus rides made shorter by company, records compared, steps practiced until the room stopped creaking. They were careful with one another the way partners are when they know a mistake will echo. They were easy with one another the way partners are when they know it won't. If a rivalry flickered around them, it lived at the edges, envy's small weather, more breeze than storm. The center held. Years wash details. That's what years do. What lasts is the feeling of a well-timed turn and the memory of two faces that seem to glow from the inside. In old clips, the lens lingers, as if grateful. You can still hear the studio's tiny gasp when they hit a break just right, the laugh that escapes Justine's mouth like a note, the way Bob steadies the frame without stealing it. It wasn't perfection. It was something kinder. Two kids moving through a moment with enough grace to let the rest of us believe in one. They were the kind of pair the camera loved from the first 8 counts. Her regal calm with a smile tucked just behind it, his easy carriage that read as gentleman before he'd said a word. When Arlene and Kenny moved into the circle, the room steadied. The beat stopped being a thing to chase and became a place to live. Where other couples flashed, they glowed. Where others reached, they arrived. The lens, which can be fickle, treated them like a window the audience could look through without pressing their forehead to the glass. The proof came in envelopes. Letters drifted in by the dozen, then by the stack, then by whatever you call that soft avalanche that keeps a mailroom busy past supper. Girls wrote about poise and posture and the way Arlene's hand found the exact quiet on Kenny's arm between counts. Boys asked after shoes, after records, after how one learned to look composed without looking stiff. Some notes were confessional, "You make my house feel happier at 3 o'clock," and some were simply lists of favorite songs, as if the right playlist might conjure the same ease in a small-town living room. The country wasn't only watching, it was rehearsing. With attention came the story that follows attention everywhere it goes. Are they? Will they? Are they still? The show never promised answers. That was part of its charm and its mercy. Arlene and Kenny carried that question with a grace more grown than their years, letting the dance hold what words could not bear without turning heavy. They seemed to understand that romance on television is less a fact than a light, warm, flattering, and prone to making ordinary weather look like dawn. Inside the studio, they navigated the same small frictions everyone did. Corners of the dance ring felt narrow some afternoons. Timing got crowded. A close-up you'd counted on shifted a breath to the left, but the larger feeling around them was not of elbows, it was of air. Partners took cues from the way Arlene's line opened a picture, from how Kenny made room without conceding the frame. The floor itself seemed to learn a politeness from watching them, as if style could teach manners, and manners could teach joy. Years have a way of sanding specifics until what's left is tone. In grainy footage, their confidence reads as kindness, their kindness reads as trust. You see two teenagers modeling how to be seen without being devoured by seeing, how to let the country look and still keep something tender intact. The letters have long been sorted, the ink gone to sepia, but their afterglow lingers like the quiet between chorus and verse. And under that glow, if you listen, you can hear a different current beginning to murmur, the off-camera truths about who got to stand where and whose joy was allowed to be televised. On television, the room looked like America at its most welcoming. Bright as a soda fountain, tidy as Sunday shoes, a chorus of teenagers turning the same hour into the same joy. But if you stood outside Studio B long enough, you could feel a second weather moving under the breeze, the sort that doesn't rattle signs or knock hats, only changes who reaches for the door. Philadelphia in the late 50s hummed with the music of Black America, yet the faces gathered in front of the lens stayed, more often than not, the color of the studio walls. No one announced a policy into the microphone. The exclusions lived in practical details, which neighborhoods heard first that tickets were available, which bus lines landed closest to the door, which chaperones were waved in with a smile, and which were met with a pause that made time heavy. Parents' letters carried hope and worry in the same ink. My daughter loves to dance. My son is polite. We just want them to be safe. And the show, wary of controversy, learned to interpret safe as a look. Good taste, it turned out, wasn't only about hems and collars. It had a complexion. Meanwhile, the soundtrack the country fell in love with owed its heartbeat to Black artists and the rooms that had lifted them long before television did. Church basements, VFW halls, after-hours joints where a backbeat could reset a bad week. The paradox sat there in the open, like a coin balanced on its edge. A national hour held aloft by rhythms born in rooms where many of the teenagers on screen had never been, and many off-screen were not yet invited. In grainy stills, you can glimpse the truth if you know how to read a crowd, who is centered, who is cropped by the edge of the frame, who is present as sound but absent as face. To say this out loud does not dissolve the magic. It locates it. Those afternoons were still tender, still real. First crushes, borrowed ties, blistered heels cooling on row house steps. But they were also curated, and curation is another word for choice. The choices loosened over time. When the show shifted west and years sanded the country's sharper corners, the camera learned new ways to be generous. Yet the old weather lingers in memory like a faint hum under the melody, a reminder that youth culture, as televised, was a map with blank spaces, and the blankness had a cost. If some kids learned poise from that hour, others learned patience. If some learned how to enter a frame, others learned how to build their own. And all of them, eventually, learned something television could not rehearse: how to grow up after the music fades. Growing up, it turns out, is not a finale so much as a fade. One song sliding under another until you realize you're humming something new. For the regulars, adulthood arrived in ordinary disguises. A bus transfer to a job across town, a diploma folded into a borrowed suit, a ring that gleamed in kitchen light instead of studio lamps. The floor at 4548 Market kept shining for a while, then the schedule shifted, the cameras moved west, and the old room learned to hold silence again. If you return today, you can still feel the warmth of the lamps in the walls, like a memory the brick refuses to surrender. What lasts is a museum without a sign, a shoebox of postcards that still smell faintly of perfume, a jukebox prize that thumps to life at reunions, a photograph where someone has written names in ballpoint along the bottom so they won't be lost. The rules that once seemed immovable, good taste, clean lines, the polite fiction that fame could be borrowed but never owned, softened their edges with time. The rivalries, too, unclenched. You meet in a church hall 30 years later and discover the person who once stole your close-up is the first to hand you a plate, the first to ask after your mother. Romances took the shapes romances always take. Some became families, some returned to friendship, some turned into stories told with a smile and an ellipsis. The country that once asked, "Are they? Will they?" learned the gracious answer. They were young, and they were kind to each other, and that was enough to carry us through an hour every afternoon. In a way, the letters taught everyone how to say goodbye. They arrived in drifts and dwindled in drifts, and somewhere in the middle, you realize affection can be true without being forever. The deeper weather never fully clears. We remember the brightness, and we remember the blank spaces around its edges. If you're honest, you let both into the frame. The show's promise was not perfection. It was rehearsal of poise, of manners, of how to be seen without losing yourself. For many kids who never reached the door, the music still got through. They learned steps in living rooms and school gyms. They formed their own rings. They made their own cameras from the attention of friends. The map widened. Watch an old clip. You'll notice what you always noticed. Chin lifts, clean breaks, smiles that bloom on the second beat of the hook. But now you hear another rhythm braided through it, the sound of a country practicing tenderness in public. Bandstand's hidden rules, its rivalries, its romances. They were all ways of holding youth up to the light long enough to study it and gentle enough to let it go. The record lifts. The room exhales. And somewhere, two teenagers find the beat again, just long enough for you to remember yours.